본 세션의 좌장은 박경미 휴잇 어소시에이츠 한국 대표님께서 맡아주시도록 하겠습니다. 박경미 대표님 부탁드립니다.
감사합니다. 안녕하세요. 휴잇 박경미입니다. Good afternoon. I'm Chris Park from Hewitt Associates. I lead Hewitt's Korea office. Thank you for attending, and we invited really good global diverse speakers and panels here, and I'd like to have a really good productive session today. I'd like to introduce key speakers. This is me. Okay. Next. The first speaker is Pete Sanborn. He's a global practice leader from Hewitt Associates in the US, and he's in charge of HR effectiveness consulting. And he has 19 years of consulting experience in Hewitt. And also he had a corporate HR management role in Group Danong and Westinghouse. He had an MBA from New York University in International Business and Finance, and also bachelor's degree from Cornell University in International and Labor Relations. The next speaker is Jong-Lung Liu. He's a senior vice president of HR of Lanxess in Germany. He was born and studied in Shanghai, and also he earned master's degree in University of Cologne in education, political science, and Anglo-American study. He had a 6-year experience in Bayer as an HR professional, and he had 3 cute children. Thank you. And so I'd like to introduce Mr. Pete Sanborn. He will share some insights from Hewitt's top companies for leaders research. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I just also wanted to tell a quick story. This is my second time to Korea. Very excited to be here, getting a chance to spend some time with some of our clients here. And I was in Hong Kong prior to, and in Shenzhen prior to coming to Seoul. And I took a flight from Hong Kong, and I was a little bit tired and was pretty casual. It was a Sunday when I arrived with jeans and so forth. And when I get out of the, into the greeting area, someone asked me, "Are you Pete Sanborn?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And then they started taking lots of pictures of me, and I was very confused. I didn't know if they had caught up to me, if I had committed some kind of criminal offense or what it was, but then they explained they're from the main newspaper and they want to take some pictures and do a quick interview, so that was fine. And then Chris showed me the next morning on Monday that my picture, and along with a number of other presenters, picture was in the paper, and we made a little PDF. And I also have 3 children, 3 daughters. They're all teenagers. And they always ask, "Dad, what is it that you do? We have no idea what it is. What is consulting? What is human resources?" And they're starting to understand a little bit more, but they think it's quite boring. And so I had to send the PDF file with my picture, along with a few quotes in Korean, which obviously they can read, just to show that anyway in Korea, I'm a bit of a celebrity. And that Dad actually is kind of cool because they want to take his picture. So for me, that was a major accomplishment, having my picture taken and being in the paper so I could show my daughters that this is what I actually do. So with that, I'd like to just do a quick introduction of Hewitt Associates, and we're going to, as Chris mentioned, talk a bit about the top companies for leaders. So Hewitt Associates is a global, both consulting and HR outsourcing firm. We're the largest consulting and HR outsourcing firm in the world. We work with many large companies globally, Asia, Europe, and North America. And our focus as an organization is obviously to help HR, but really have an overall mission, as you can see, which is to help make the world a better place to work. So we think very it's very important that HR has a contribution to creating a better global workplace, which then has a direct impact on business performance and on how well companies throughout the world treat their employees, engage their employees, and motivate their employees. One of the studies that we do on a biannual basis is called the Top Companies for Leaders. And this really identifies what are some of the key principles as well as practices from top companies for leaders that help drive excellent financial results. And we have seen consistently, so we started this study back in 2001. The last release was in 2007. The next release will be at the end of November in 2009. And we have both regional cut of what we view as the top companies for leaders, as well as overall global list of the top companies for leaders. And in that, we had this year about 600 companies who applied, and we choose a global list of 20 companies. So it's quite competitive. And it's not Hewitt who makes the judging, because people might say you're a bit biased. You might prefer to choose your clients. So we actually have an independent panel of leading scholars, academics, other people globally that make that selection. We definitely think that today leadership is the key determinant of what differentiates average companies from very, very good companies and very good performance. That you need a ready supply of leadership talent to manage the unrelenting pressures of the day, to both in the current economic environment to become leaner, but also to be poised for the growth that will come in the future. And we know, too, that it's becoming increasingly difficult with intensified competition, global competition, that both the business and your ability to attract and develop the best talent is becoming increasingly difficult. And most, as we interviewed as part of the study, CEOs, senior leaders, one of the things they consistently said was that they do not have the leadership talent necessary, that they are not satisfied with the ability, which is supported by HR, to really drive and build the leaders needed for the future. And this is not just within their home country, but really global, taking a much more global approach to leadership and talent development. And in the companies that do this well, and we'll provide some examples, and I think what's nice is that we'll talk a little bit about the research first, and then we'll go into more specifics in terms of some examples of the companies. That in the top companies for leaders, leadership and a commitment to leadership is really a part of running the business. And you really sense this from the moment you walk into the door of a top company for leaders. So Procter & Gamble has historically been a top company for leaders. IBM, General Electric, Hindustan, Unilever, Nokia, and others have been top companies for leaders. And you sense that there's a genuine belief in the importance of developing leaders and the importance of making sure there's a pipeline of future talent. And this is something that's a primary commitment on the part of leaders, that they're spending significant time, the top leaders, in identifying, assessing, and developing and mentoring those leaders, the future potential. It's not just a to-do list, something that they have to do once a year. It's really a part of their everyday job. We actually see some CEOs, as we do interviews, that say that over half of their job is really focused on identification and the ongoing coaching and development of other people, building that future pool of leaders for success of the company. And that's true, I think it's not just something that's specific to one country, it's really true globally. So how does this investment come to life? So first of all, that you need that active and supportive senior management team who drive the leadership agenda, and then clear execution on that strategy. So it's more than just words. It's actually making sure that you're following up and doing the appropriate things to build the leaders. And we see that HR has a role both in building leadership practices and making sure that there's leading practices, but even more importantly, because and we'll talk a little about it, leadership practices don't have to be overly complex. In fact, the ones that are most successful are much simpler. But there needs to be a commitment on the part of management, and HR plays a key role in helping ensure that commitment of management to supporting the development of leaders. And expectations and accountability. So if we look at a number of the top companies for leaders, we see that one of the things that the senior management team is judged upon is their ability to build out leaders. And it's, obviously you're judged on your financial results and, how well your stock is appreciating and your growth objectives. But also in the top companies for leaders, there's a specific objectives in the performance plan of CEOs around leadership development. It can differ, obviously, by company, but it's very explicit. So these top companies really do develop, through formal measures and informal culture, an environment that's seen more and more so on a global basis. And I'd say definitely Procter & Gamble is an example of this, that does a very good job of developing leaders, where people are given opportunities early on in their career. And if you join a company like a P&G or General Electric, anywhere in the world, you're going to have opportunities, the best people have opportunities to move quickly and take on new important challenges that are business critical, and do that early on in their career, not have to wait till they're as old as I am, but can do it early on. So those are some of the highlights. So some of the key points in terms of what is it that makes companies successful. So one I'd like to mention is that there's really no substitute for experience. While having development programs in place is important, it's really about making sure that you're building a portfolio of experiences, then more and more so globally, many times across function, that builds those leaders. And we definitely know that companies need to be focused, especially during these tough times, and planful in terms of how they do that. So one term that we use is companies spend a lot of time typically identifying who the top potential would be, and who the people that have the most long-term potential would be. But the frequent mistake that we see with companies is they spend a lot of time assessing people and identifying top talent, many times put people through various programs, development programs, action learning, but do not actually test those people by putting them in critical roles. So companies that do the best job of developing leaders not only spend a lot of time assessing, developing, putting them through training, but actually move them not just to interesting roles, but the roles that will really test them. And this is even more so true in the last year and a half with the economic environment. We had one CEO who told us that while it's been very tough environment, most of his leaders had only led during growth times. And this was probably the best test to see how they would respond when it was both, obviously, growth as well as margin pressure. And so one company that we see is particularly good at this is Hindustan Unilever, large Indian company, consumer products company you may be aware of, has a very good external brand. They also have been very successful in defining global talent. Obviously a lot in India, but global talent. And for their top 200 people, they have a board-level objective of having those people in very, very critical roles and moving those people. Now, one of the interesting things is some companies have learned you don't want to keep people in a role for too short of a time, because it doesn't really test them and you can't see the outcomes of the work. So what increasingly companies are doing is making sure that there's enough time in the role that you can actually see the outcomes. If you have someone in and out of role in 1 or 2 years, they keep moving, and there's a joke that that people have in the past moved so quickly that you never really could see what the outcomes, because by the time the outcomes come out, they're 2 or 3 roles on. So that's a key piece, is having that experience. The other thing I'd like to point out on this is a key strategy of practice is that leaders must be involved in teaching other leaders. So if you look at your senior management team, how much time do they spend mentoring and supporting the development of others? And a company that we see is particularly good at this is Nokia. The Nokia is board-level management, so their top 12 managers all have objectives and spend a significant amount of time mentoring. And this is one of the issues around mentoring, is really trying to foster, so it's not just mentoring someone who's like you, it's mentoring a diverse group of people and spending time with them, sharing experiences, listening to them, providing them coaching and counseling one-on-one, So it's one thing to stand in front of a group and do a presentation. It's very much another thing to have lunch with someone and to talk about some of the challenges and what they see as some of their key challenges, and not to tell them what to do, but more coaching and asking questions and providing suggestions. And making those personal connections are critical. Obviously, you can't do that with everyone with your senior management team, but Nokia has been very successful at this. We, as part of the study that we do for Top Companies for Leaders, we look at what are the techniques that differentiate the top companies in terms of development. So, some of the, let's say, a bit more traditional techniques, such as external degree programs, global assignments, mentoring programs, we see as important. But if we look at the factors, and this would be up on the right-hand side, so just to give you an idea, that the top companies are the dark blue bar graph, and the other companies are the light blue. So if you look at what distinguishes the top companies from others, it has things such as internal leadership training. And when we mean internal leadership training, we mean that it's actually leaders who are conducting and facilitating these leadership classes. So, how much time do the leaders in your company actually spend in the development and training of others? We see that as a key determinant of top companies for leaders. Developmental assignments. So being very focused on why someone is moving. So if you're moving someone, from HR into finance, being very explicit around the development objectives. So the development objective of, we need you to improve your business acumen, the understanding of P&L and cash flow and other key terms. So this is going to be an assignment with specific development objectives, as well as, obviously specific business objectives too. The other piece is around special project teams, putting people together. And this is increasingly possible globally, where you can do it virtually with some time in person, but we're seeing many of our clients that are pulling together global teams on action learning. So it's specific goals in mind to develop. So it could be around developing, improving capability with acquisitions. It could be we're trying to launch a new product and we want some of your ideas around the marketing and sales of that. But doing that on a global basis. So you're pulling together people that come from India, Korea, China, Singapore, Germany, France, Brazil, Argentina, U.S., and the challenge is obviously to work on the assignment and be very effective, because the end result is typically a presentation to a very senior management team. But also there's a challenge, a test on how can you function globally. Will leaders emerge? Will you respect the contribution of people who may not have the fluency in the language of business, of English? And how do you pull out their contribution? And they assign coaches to the group to support them with that, because it's not easy to do. But those are the kind of techniques that we see as very critical. So this is a bit of an overview of some of the key ways to develop leaders. We've hit on some of them already. But you see that it's not so much about specific training programs. It's more about experiential learning. We know that adults really learn best through experiential learning, not so much by reading something, memorizing it, providing an answer back. But it's about obtaining knowledge and then applying that knowledge, whether it's a case study approach with a team or whether it's actually on the job. And just a couple examples here in terms of, one is action learning, which is what I mentioned, applying a specific, having a team work on a specific objective. General Mills is a company that's done very well here. They use something called business simulations, where they pull together people globally to work on specific business simulations. And they have created even competitive, where there are some right and wrong answers, and they do present in front of their senior management. Exposure, that's a key piece. Exposure at early on in the career. That's what, if we look at, we're talking a bit over lunch, if we look at people that are millenniums and Generation Y, they're looking for experiences early on in their career. And many times, in most cultures, are not really happy to sit back and do something mundane for a decade before given an experience. So a company that is very good at that exposure is McKinsey Consultants. They provide, right out of school, they hire people out of bachelor's degrees and MBA degrees, and they put people on key projects with some of the key thought leaders in the firm. They have over 2,000 consultants on average who are working outside on a project outside their home country. So they're providing that kind of global international exposure really early on. And obviously some of the McKinsey people are going to move into business or academia or other areas, but they keep those connections and they build that affiliation, that network. So those are what we see as some of the key success factors around developing leaders. And I'd like to just spend a few minutes on what are some of the implications. So one of the questions we asked with the 2009 study is, with the economic downturn, what have the implications been on leadership development? So we definitely see that the top companies are putting as much, if not even more, focus on leadership development. That they're trying to do things efficiently, so they're doing things such as trying to do more online learning and deliver more of the content in something other than a classroom-based style. But they're also, and Hewlett-Packard and GE are very good examples of this, are rather than, GE has their Crotonville center outside of New York City, which has traditionally been the mecca. So you know you made it in GE when you're invited to Crotonville for a training program, back then with Jack Welch, now with Jeff Immelt. What they've done now is they've decentralized that. They have created these leadership development centers in different parts of the world. So places like Shanghai, Munich, Bangalore, and have said it's not about coming to Crotonville, it's about the experience you're going to obtain, and we're going to try to have a very high-quality experience in different parts of the world. There is continued pressure from the board on succession planning, probably even more so now because the boards really recognize the importance of a strong pipeline of leaders. There's a focus on top talent and building out global top talent with high potentials. Emphasis Technologies has a very interesting program called Voice of Youth. And they saw through engagement work and through analysis that many of their young, very talented young employees were not getting exposure to senior management. And they created a program around some of their high potential people that would have regular forums with their most senior management. And the idea was, it wasn't overly structured. It wasn't like, this is the topic, we're going to train you on this. It was more introducing, competitive challenge or what they're trying to do in terms of expansion globally, and having a discussion, having this group challenge the managers. It wasn't just about one-way communication. It was very much about challenging. So I mentioned, this has been a key time for the assessment of talent. People that have never experienced this kind of economic downturn, how have they responded? And we also see clients that are doing selective poaching. And when we use the word poaching, that means identifying key talent that may be vulnerable in various companies, maybe because the company's economic environment is not so good or the company's had large layoffs, and selectively hiring those people. Not mass-scale hiring, because obviously for most companies they're not positioned for that, but identifying some key talent and attracting that key talent. And just last 2 points is, one is, and this is a theme I think throughout, is that companies in their home country recognize for them to be the best and to be globally competitive, they've got to be identifying and developing talent throughout the world. So, that includes emerging markets. For Korean companies, it's thinking as you're globalizing, how do you ensure that people see it's not just a job, but there's a career opportunity. And we all know that once you get outside of your home country, that becomes much more challenging. So you have to be creative and innovative to find ways to do that. And then the final point is really around senior management visibility. So there's been one set of companies who, because of the economic issues, and of course not everybody's faced it, but the senior management has withdrawn and has been very quiet, and everybody's saying, what are they doing? And they're saying, we're planning, we're thinking about what the next steps are. So that's one style. The other style is where the senior management team has been even more visible, has been actively talking to people and saying, business is difficult. We don't know what the next quarter will be, but here's what we're thinking. Been very open and candid, taking input from people, kind of breaking down a bit the mystique that the senior managers all knowing. And what we see as important is those conversations. And one example is Intel. Many companies, because of the economic downturn, actually did a travel ban and did not allow hardly anyone to travel. one of the things that Intel did, I know we've got one of the executives from Intel at the Global HR Forum, is they really encourage leaders to be even more on the road because they recognize that during tough times, that leadership visibility and talking to people, getting ideas about the strategy and what their thoughts are, as well as just having that visibility, providing reassurance that the company is moving in the right direction and the leaders are committed to it and they're to both the success of the company as well as to the people. So those are just some highlights from the study. There will be the full results coming out at the end of November on the top companies for leaders globally. And at this point in time, I'd like to turn it back to Chris. Or go ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Actually, he prepared 20 minutes presentation, but I asked him to speak slower, so he took a little bit more minutes. Thank you. Hello.
Good afternoon, my dear HR colleagues, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. During lunchtime, we were speculating how many participants will be in the room when we are sitting on the stage. We were thinking about something between 70, 80. And I just counted the room roughly, and I think we have 300, even maybe 400 people in the room. I'm quite overwhelmed by the interest of this topic, and by your interest showing also to this international panel. Of course, I asked myself, what can be my contribution for a topic which I think every HR professional has on his agenda or her agenda, which everybody has a lot to say about ups and downs, about the lights and the shadows of this topic. I think the very reason why I'm standing here in front of you is not that much that I'm going to present you a best practice case. I think the reason I'm standing here in front of you is rather I want to present a case study out of my own personal experience during the last 5 years, building up a company from scratch, building up a company, as I said yesterday during the the plenum discussion, building up a company under the shadow of a huge former parent company. What we have done and what kind of lessons we have drawn out of that rather unique experience. So if you want, it's rather a case study and it's not necessarily about best practice. Following the logic of Professor Dave Ulrich, that whenever you talk about human resources, you need to put this very topic in the business context, and when we are talking about HR development, again in the entire HR context. I'd like to start with 2 pages, just give you a brief understanding about what this company is about and what's on my agenda as someone responsible for the global HR affair of the group. We are based in Germany. We are one of the leading specialty chemical companies in the industry. And you see some of our products. Basically, Hankook Tire is among the top 10 customers of Lanxess. And in fact, we are the #1 suppliers of synthetic rubber, which you need to make tires and wheels. In other words, if I would exaggerate a little bit, without Lanxess, there is no global mobility. We as a company have, on the one hand, 140 years business heritage. We are in business since generations. As a company, we are new. We were spun off 5 years ago from the Bayer Group. Why would a company be willing to give up part of his business? In our particular case, its historical root, because the business was in such a terrible shape that nobody had any confidence anymore to run it further in the way that it has been managed over the last 2 decades. Therefore, we have a contradiction of managing a business which has been there since more than a century, at the same time creating an identity for our global population, which at that time was over 20,000 worldwide, and give them a new sense of belonging and a new sense of identity, and try to keep them and get the best out of them. Another anecdote to show you about the history about this dilemma is that I talked about rubber. Rubber has been in the market since 100 years. We are celebrating this year 100 years of synthetic rubber. If I think of my colleagues working for P&G, that their product circle and product life is measured in months and then in decades, you can see how different the nature of our business is. And this is something we should not forget when we later on start talking about HR development. It's a $10 billion US sales, and as of end last year, 15,000 employees, and half of them are based in Europe. 70% of them in total are based, half of them are based in Germany, and 70% of them in total are based in Europe. Although my title is Global HR Head, I spent at least 60% of my time dealing with German HR affairs, because that's the nature and that's the setup of the company. What's the main business challenges? This is basically a triangular situation of market, raw materials, and technology. 50 years ago, or even in the early 80s, European chemical companies, together with our American competitors, own all the three corners of this triangle. We had our market, we had our technology. Although we do not have raw materials on the spot in Germany, they were delivered to us in front of our door, willingly, at the cheapest possible price. 30 years down the road, we merely possess any of these three corners. The market is moving eastwards. Raw materials, as we all know, the barrel of oil is getting back to $80 per barrel yesterday again. And even on the technological front, where here and there we still have a certain leading edge, we are competing increasingly with our, especially Asian competitors, and they are catching up very fast. This is not a pretty situation for any company that want to compete and survive. And this is also the reason why there is a company called Lanxess et al. At the end of this decade. So this is the business environment and the key facts and figures surrounding the company. Coming to human resources, developing people is never isolated only as the issue of developing people. I'm totally of the same opinion as Pete has just illustrated. So before I came to the last point of people development, on the next following pages, I think at least three important agenda points are worth mentioning. That determines how we try to manage our workforce, how we try to do it globally. That is managing change, managing deep sweep and repeated restructuring, and try to create a new meaning of developing people in a lean and flat organization. Coming to the first point of managing change. Managing change is a common agenda for all of us. I would like to mention one aspect of that, that is speed. In my view, and according to my personal experience, it's not very much about the speed as such, rather than the ability of you to control this speed. We have, as a new company 5 years ago, acted as fast as we can in changing and dramatically changing our HR systems and policies. So this was speed in its original meaning of being fast. At the same time, although we inherited a management team which was just given to us by the mother company, although we know there are a lot to be done, also on the people front, it took us almost 4 years to went through an overhaul of our top management. So in this regard, speed was not decisive factor, but the patience. Each of the change at the top management is a carefully orchestrated and well-prepared change process itself. So talking about change management is not necessarily always a matter of being fast. When you want to change the fundamentals of your HR system, I would advise any companies going through a similar process to do it during the first 3 to 6 months. When it comes to people decisions, speed or fastness is not necessarily the best remedy to cure your illness or to cure your disease. And we had good experience with that. Talking about deep and sweep and even repeated restructuring, of course, it's a challenge for human resource as a whole, how to keep your people motivated. And at the end of the day, we have turned around the company from the very last in terms of profitability 2004 into slightly above European average within a matter of 3 years. At the end of the day, it's not about talking, it's not about everything you sell as human resource to your employees. It's about delivery of results. People only believe you if you have a sound business case, and not only a business case, you also have results to support that. I will come back on this point 2 pages later. And the third point is indeed equally important. What is the sense and the meaning of managing or developing people when you cut your hierarchies, take a hierarchy out of your organization and become a more and more lean and flat organization? In our case, we slashed our hierarchy inherited from Bayer by more than half. In former time, it was among top management, below management board, 9 management levels. We started with 4, outright, after 3 months. It is necessary, and it was one of the best decisions we have ever made. On the other hand, it posed from the very first day the question about how can we make our career in this company. If I'm already at level 3, does this mean that I have only 1 step to go? And then that's the end of my development story. How to let the organization understand that a horizontal movement, enlargement of your experience and exposure are at least equally important and meaningful in terms of developing people. This was a challenge we faced from the very beginning, and I would say still today. We are always on search for right answers for this particular issue. So basically, you saw my, my headline for this afternoon's presentation. This was given by the organizers to me. I would rather have added a subtitle saying managing people development in a changing, uncertain, and a lean environment. And that's the topic, and that's the experience I've gathered over the past few years. And that's my privilege as well to be able to go through that process. Coming to the key learnings, I would reduce it down to 4 things. Yesterday, sitting on the same stage, I was trying to politely give a comment from my side saying, please, don't let us talk about another new approach. Don't let us talk about another new theory. We have been driven, pushed by yet another new theory, yet another new concept over decades now. Let's sit back and think a little bit and go back to some so-called conventional wisdom. And I list 4 of them, which was vital for us, given our own circumstance. That is simplicity, continuity, courage, and realism. In terms of simplicity, and this is combined with continuity, what we need at a time of change, at a time where you even don't know whether you will be in business in 5 years, even as a huge conglomerate, even as a seemingly iconic institution in your industry, the number 1 or number 2, nobody can be sure of changes, of revolutionary changes on the technological side and on the market side. The only way for human resources to make a meaningful contribution is to make your systems as simple as possible, so it can have a long and robust lifespan, regardless of business circle, regardless of change of CEOs. It is similarly true that you need a system. Don't change your system too fast and too often, just because it's trendy, just because everybody else is doing that. With the system and be aware of its own deficit and manage it, and try to keep the same system over a period, let's say, try to do it over a decade, the result is usually better. The result is usually better, and in our case, it's definitely so. Then keep on changing, like driving on the highway. Keep on changing the lanes, scientifically proven, is not going to help you to move much faster. Stay on course and show this continuity, and this is rewarding in terms of quality of judgment, quality of understanding of your talent pipeline, and stick to that. Simplicity and continuity don't help you if you do not have the courage to take decisions. Even go one step back. Doing things simple does not require that much intellectual capacity. Everybody understands the virtue of being simple. Why 90% of the companies still do things way too complicated? It's because of lack of courage. Simplicity means less differentiation. Less differentiation means you are not able to meet the needs of each individual stakeholders in your company and outside your company. And here, the lack of courage or the fact of having some courage to take decisions are the vital success factors. And the last but not least, average is not a wrong word. Average is not a bad word. You should not always focus on managing talent. It is equally vital to manage your average. Every company has an average. Even those companies who say, I have the best of the best, you still have an average. Managing the average and lift them. This is, I believe, the fundamental issue of bringing organization forward. We HR people tend to think too much in an elite concept of focusing on the talent, building up the pipelines. If we would forget the 80%, 90% of your organization, which is the so-called average, then you will be lost sooner or later. I would like to skip this page because I'm already warned that only 5 minutes left. In fact, I intended to show you how we do it. Also, there is no basic secret to that. But we have been implementing this structure, an integrated conference system, even before the company went on the stock exchange, which means starting 2004, we started this conference, when some of the board members were even new. But we share the same belief. Let's start it, and let's keep it in this place. Let's do it always in the same way over a period of time. And now, 2009, if I would look back, I would say the quality of our conferences, because we keep the format exactly bottom up, first with our business units, then cross-business units, so there are a kind of cross-fertilization effect. And then at the board level, every board members, beside managing people continuously, spends at least a whole week, which is institutionalized, dedicated for HR development. 1 day for Global HR Conference, 2 days for the so-called development conference, and once a year, at least once, being an observer for our so-called assessment center. And then I asked myself the question of real differentiators. These days, the knowledge about how to develop people are commodities. You go into a bookstore every quarter, you find so many new titles, so many smart theories about how you should do better. These are not the real differentiator anymore. You can access this knowledge at any time, around the world, around the clock. The real differentiators, I would say, according to our experience, 2 things. And they are, interestingly, outside human resources, or outside classical understanding of human resources. That is a resilient business model, intelligent organization, and efficient resource allocation. And that is low tolerance towards non-performing managers. I don't say zero tolerance. It won't be right and just and fair to apply zero tolerance. But you need to have an extremely low tolerance for those who do not deliver. And also for those who deliver on the business side, but not on the people side. These are, for me, the real differentiators. And for me, it's no problem to share this with you, because I know many companies, even they would intellectually comprehend this, there are so many real constraints for them that prevent them from really implementing that. Last 2 questions I want to ask the audience and also ask myself, global talent, who are they? I commented yesterday briefly during the other session. I think the first 2 points are common understanding and common sense. It cannot be an issue of passport and nationality. What is there any help having a board management board holding 3, 4, 5 different passports, but each of them are narrow-minded? Then you have a diversity on paper which serves nobody's interest. Also, the second point, I think, is quite obvious. Everybody these days knows global talent somehow needs to be exposed to different cultures and different backgrounds. But I think also the third point is particularly important and critical. Global talent needs to be familiar with global issues. And global talent, if we come back to the business context, global talent should have experience with managing at least growth, consolidation, innovation, and strategic acquisitions. These are the things that so-called global talent has to go through. Even if he goes through this process in one region, I think this already still qualifies this person as a global talent, because being familiar with different business cycles makes you have a better precondition to be a true and genuine global talent and global manager. My last page. Also here I would like to be a bit provocative. Succession plan, what for? If you are not even sure whether you will be in business next year or in next 5 years. I think we need to differentiate. If you do a succession plan in your company for the sake of a better overview and a categorization of your in-house talent pipeline, it is worth doing that. Please continue. If you want to use it as a kind of retention tool, give your people a signal that we are doing something for you, don't worry, don't go elsewhere, the likelihood that this approach would backfire is higher than the benefits of such approach that might return to you. And last but not least, I'm not doing succession plan bashing, but I think we need to have a realistic expectation in terms what succession plan can really do. And last but not least, any excellent succession plan does not replace need to be courageous when the time comes that you have to make a decision. And putting people at the earliest possible time into the larger responsibility is still the name of the game. Thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to our exchanges later on. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Liu. Very interestingly, our two speakers presented from two different sources. One speaker presented from the research and consulting experience, and the other speaker presented from his own corporate HR experiences. But I found there are common things. That one is talent management is about experience and exposure. And also, secondly, the talent management is about part of running business. And also, Mr. Liu mentioned that two real differentiators come from outside of HR, such as well-performing businesses. I was very impressed about that. And also, I'm really proud of our speakers and panels. Mr. Liu, the Chinese based in Germany, finished his speaking. And also, I'd like to introduce two more global and diverse panels. One is American, based in Seoul, and also Indian, based in Seoul. Ms. Linda Myers. Linda Myers is Vice President of SK Holdings for Global Talent Management, and she has the role almost 2 years in Seoul. And she came to Seoul to accelerate globalization of SK Holdings, SK Group, sorry. And she's SK's first female executive, and she has 25 experiences in HR professionals as well as consulting. She earned her master's degree and doctor's degree from Harvard. I think it is interesting. When I joined Hewitt 10 years ago, my first consulting project was a part of a team to find out how to develop women leaders in SK Group. And then now I see. And the second speaker, Mr. Mahbub Alam, he has very different career. He has only P&G experience for 13 years. As we all know, P&G is develop talent and leaders within P&G. He's now based in Seoul as regional HR manager, and also he has very different the locations as a HR in Singapore, Malaysia, India, and he was a compensation and benefit manager covering India, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh, quite global. And interestingly, I like to mention that his thesis included women in management, covering aspects that impact women's continued employment in India. Let me introduce Ms. Myers.
Is this on? Can you hear me? Okay. 안녕하세요. Hello. Ni hao. Namaste.
Thank you.
I want to congratulate you, Chris, on bringing together such a global team. After all, this is a global human resource.
Thank you.
And we're all glad to be part of your team. So what I would like to talk about today are 3 points that come from the experiences that I have been able to enjoy during the last 2 years here in my role as SK. I also want to make sure that I point out that both Mr. Sanborn and Liu Zhenrong both make very important points about global talent, about developing leaders, and about succession planning that enlarge our understanding about these systems and why they're so important for Korea and Korea's developing position in the world. And I would like to point out that it is the schools that are developing the talent that businesses need to grow, and it is business that are developing the talent that Korea needs to grow. So the integration of these two is critically important. The world is changing rapidly, and if Korea is to develop itself as it has been tremendously, at the economic pace that it has been, it needs to continue to develop and replace its talent to keep business innovative, competitive, and thriving. This means that exports that the world wants needs to be flowing out, and investments and tourists need to be flowing in, and all this requires talent. Successful companies do not have leadership and talent development practices that are static. They refine and they adapt and they try some new talent and succession management practices to meet changing circumstances over time. And this is exactly what SK and LG are both trying to do. By bringing in several seasoned professionals at the executive level who look, think, and behave differently from most Korean leaders, we add value from the differences that we bring, the differences in the cultures that we come from, and the differences in the range of experiences that we've had throughout our careers and our lifetimes. Probably because I'm the only female in the group, my role, I think, is the most challenging. Because adding value to the work that I do means that I need to figure out the correct ways to do my job in a culture that is described as Confucian, male-dominated, seniority and relationship-based, hierarchical, collective, status-conscious, risk-averse, where a lot of behaviors are geared towards saving face. Sometimes I'm successful at helping to make some changes, and sometimes I'm not. So here is some of what I have noticed in the time that I have been here. I think that when we talk about globalization, we need to change the way we think about talent development, leadership development, and succession planning. First, I think we need to focus much more time and money on identifying and developing young talent. Young talent is the most able and capable today of competing in the very rapidly changing global world that we live in today. To me, that means focusing on entry-level entrants to Korean companies. I think that means nurturing them in planned leadership development programs and accelerating their ability to grow quickly and to learn how to compete in this new world. Korea needs to catch up with the rest of the G20 countries in many ways. It doesn't have a lot of time before baby boomers leave the workplace and the Gen Xers are forced to take on more responsibility. I think that if we're not more focused on young talent, they're not going to be able to compete in the global marketplace. Older talent, of course, is important, and they generate the knowledge that the young talent needs. But it's harder to take more senior talent out of their comfort zones because they are resistant to change. When we compare Korean talent with European talent or American talent, Korean talent come out very strong in technical areas, but not as strong in other areas that are critical for Korea to grow globally. These areas are the ability to innovate, the ability to take risks, and the ability to speak the global language of business, which is English. Let me tell you a little story. In my apartment building in Mapo, there's a little boy whom I see always with his mother, or sometimes his little brother, sometimes his grandmother or his grandfather. And whenever I see him, he always looks directly at my face, and he holds up his hand while he's holding his mother's hand, and he says, "Hi, my name is Kevin." And I was always so impressed when I would meet Kevin. Of course, his mother was just taking him and trying to keep him away and shushing him. But he was bold, and he was not shy, and he knew that I was a Weikukin. And he knew what language to speak in. So I think the Kevins of the world, the Kevins of Korea, the Kevins of France, the Kevins of every country are really important for us to nurture. I think the younger the talent is, the more malleable they are, and the easier it is to mold them into great leaders for the new global world in which we live today. I'm not saying we don't do this now. I'm just saying that it's getting harder and harder to say to young people, oh, you have to wait 5 years, or oh, you have to wait 7 years until you get more responsibility and a promotion. I think it's time that we challenge our people, our young people, and we promote them and give them more responsibility according to their capability and the results that they have shown, not an arbitrary time frame. My second point is that one of the things that I've noticed is that I think we need to focus more on women in the workplace. I know that the birth rate for Korea is the lowest in the world, and I know that's a very big concern. I think that a lot of people would like nothing more than for the birth rate here to grow, to double, to triple. But I think it's also very important for us to realize that women have always been the backbone of this country. The women here are strong, they're talented, they're educated, and they're capable. And I think that there's a way to increase the birth rate at the same time that we keep or bring women into the workplace. Keeping them out and asking them only to be mothers is not good for them, and it's not good for us. I think that if we can make investments in women, in family-friendly policies in our workplaces, if we can provide both baby and daycare, if we can incentivize women with flexible time as well, then we can have both men and women happily and healthily raising productive citizens who can bring children into the world that can be the future of Korea. My third point is that as Korean companies like SK, like Samsung, like Hyundai, like SK begin to bring more global talent to diversify the workplace, that onboarding, whether it is at the entry level or at the mid-level, even at the senior level, whenever that occurs, needs to be done in the global language of English, and it needs to be done collectively. Sometimes at SK I see the foreigners are educated in English and the Koreans are educated in Korean. But if we all have to work together, shouldn't we all be learning about the company and its strengths and its opportunities in the same place at the same time? It saves time for the trainer, it saves resources, and it also promotes the very, very important aspect of relationship building. So from my 2 years of experience here, those are the opportunities that I see that we have to share together to build what is already a strong and vibrant and exciting place to live and work. So I thank you for listening to me, and I'm going to pass the microphone on to my colleague.
안녕하세요. I apologize, I can't speak Korean. And if somebody had to grade me on that, I would be F minus 10. I know a couple of things only. 우회전, 좌회전, 직진, 안녕하세요. So that's all. And that's because I have just been in Korea for about a year or so. But I have enjoyed every bit of the Korean lifestyle that Korea has to offer to us as a family. And very excitingly, in the company itself that I'm serving, which is Procter & Gamble. Many of you may get confused. My mother was confused first when I said I'm going to join Procter & Gamble. And he said, hey, are you joining a gambling company? And I said, that's not the place. P&G, as you know, is... I hate to use the word company, but I would like to use the word institution. An institution that has lived for 175 years and started with a humble beginning in Cincinnati with selling soaps and candles. And now it's a big, more than $80 billion company. P&G Korea has been in existence since 1989. Over the years, it has grown into a formidable, respectable organization in Korea, and we feel very proud of that. The subject talent development, succession planning, leadership development is probably at the core of Procter & Gamble's philosophy. It's at the core of Procter & Gamble's what we call purpose, values, and principles. And sometimes the word asset is used in terms of an ROI. So what's the return on it? For us, people are a continuous stream of returns. There is endless, infinite possibilities. And as in that context, we have developed a philosophy, and that philosophy or policy that you would call it is called promote from within. Promote from within is a very unique, not a very popular policy practiced by many community companies. It essentially means that we recruit people only at entry level and very, very rarely and selectively at mid-career levels, except in situations and circumstances where either we do not have the expertise and it's a new area that we want to get into. For example, we're looking at a technology in hair care, and that's a completely new technology, and we don't have scientists specializing in that area. We might end up having, mid-career hires. But other than that, you only join at an entry level in Procter & Gamble. So every time we interview a person, I look into the eye of that candidate and evaluate that person, that can that person tomorrow be my boss, my CEO? And it gives us an intense pride to constantly work towards, selecting the best of the best, so that we create the talent pipeline for the future and for the generations to come. Because that's how it has happened for the last 175 years in P&G, and probably even in this, what we term VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. We are probably one of the few players, few companies who practice promote from within. And therefore, in that context, the point I wanted to say is basically three here. One is about how do we manage talent in P&G, and what do we think about P&G in the context of promote from within. The second was in the context of larger change that is happening around the world, and how talent globally is working and feeling and wants to in terms of their career. And the third is implications and some thoughts for Korea and how we can work together. The first one first, which is the Procter & Gamble's philosophy. Talent development for us really start at a recruiting level. You actually have 5 laborious steps to finally get into the gates of Procter & Gamble, and many times students tell us it's cumbersome. But we pay a lot of attention, a lot of energy and resources in just selecting that right talent for us. The second is, how do we groom the talent over the years? And in some ways, in many ways, what Pete has talked about, or what Lee, you have talked about, is very much live and kicking in Procter & Gamble. At, let us say, Korea level, we have a talent development council where we select top 10% of our junior level managers and kind of assess their potential, capabilities, and what they can reach in their careers. And then we have kind of a very operational but very simple an analysis of what are the gaps the person has and what are the things we could do as a company to fill those gaps to the person, for that individual. And that starts the journey of how do we develop talent, which includes training and development, assignment planning, accelerator experiences, mentorship program, coaching program. It's a whole host of things that you have to do. And then Korea then sends nomination at regional level, which then gets collected, discussed, managed every quarter by the Asia leadership team, which then gets sent to the global team, and that is discussed twice a year. And then that gives us the stream of talent that we need at general manager and CEO level. The second aspect of that is we are the learning process, the talent development process doesn't really stop. Next week, my CEO is going to spend 7 days in US, where all the CEOs of Procter & Gamble companies will come together, and they will have, of course, the business review and what's going on for the business, what's the strategy for the future. But there is a time allocated where they will go through intense training program done by internal as well as external people on their developmental opportunities, and we call that as General Managers College. So that's the depth and seriousness with which we look at talent development and talent succession planning / career planning. Now, it may sound very rosy, but it's not. I would not claim that it's the best, and no other company can be as good as that. It's just an example of how Procter & Gamble does things. The second aspect in talent development, increasingly we are focusing on, is on diversity. So depending on the country that you are talking about, so for Korea it's gender diversity, for US it is minority racial diversity, in places like UK it is again racial diversity or ethnicity diversity that we are talking about. The company is increasingly focused on building a diverse workforce. And why is that? Why do we want to do that? Is just because it's a fad with people would like it and see, oh, so many women are in leadership positions in Procter & Gamble? No. The idea is that we really believe that the engine of growth for the future, for the next 130, 35, 175 years for Procter & Gamble is going to come through innovation. And diversity lends a major support to the effort of innovation. And that's where we nurture ideas, and that's where and to that end, Korea has done a fantastic job. 5 years ago, our female managers' representation in the company was less than 23%. Now it's standing at whopping 48%. That's a great, great achievement that we have done in the last 5 years or so. And we would continue to do that. Now, added to that, what has brought in, we have learned from, as a company, from Korea has been very great in digital marketing. So what are the things that we could learn from Korea and then export it to other markets in Procter & Gamble, within Procter & Gamble family? And that has been another example where innovation has come to Korea and then that got exported to other markets. And Korea right now is a leading hub for digital marketing for the company. Commitment to diversity is extremely critical in the context of talent development. Coming to the second point that I had, which is around, what is there for Korean or Korean talent and Korean universities. Our experience tells us that the Korean talent that we produce today is one of the world's class. Even the Korean universities that the kind of education is provided is world class. It's comparable to any good university around the world. But there are some areas of opportunities. And some areas of opportunities that we have found is, we hate to call it English communication, because it's not about English, it's about global communication. How do you effectively communicate across cultures, and we have been investing a lot of energy and resource around building capability on that. And therefore, I believe that there is an opportunity where companies, the academia, the university, and the student community in themselves can come together and work towards, building a community which is very competent in global communication skills, which is relevant for the business and for that individual himself or herself. So that's an opportunity that we have. In terms of how the globe is moving, the third point that I wanted to say is what's happening to the talent as such. Our experience tells us that over a period of 7 to 10 years, the percentage of expatriates in Procter & Gamble has increased from 2,000 to about 4,000 or 5,000, just doubled. So you just see how many people want to go outside their home country and work, and companies are willing and flexible to host that. It's a cost, it's a huge cost for the company. And but that is symbolic data to say that people are becoming very flexible in working in different cultures, different geographies, and therefore in that context, what can Korean talent do today that they can also be competent, eligible, and are successful when they work outside their home countries? In P&G Korea, we have about 35 odd talents working from Korea, Koreans who are working outside Procter & Gamble Korea. So they have done a fantastic job of it. The second is in the context of Korea itself. As Linda talked about, birth rate is falling. At some stage, there will be a time where there will be a dearth of local talents for Korean companies in Korea. And therefore, we all of us have to open our minds and hearts in terms of inviting talents from across the globe to come and work and flourish in Korea, and therefore build a further greater stream of innovation, greater stream of business, and make Korea a more globally competitive nation. So that's what I had to say. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to spend some time with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mabu. The diversity and women in leadership are one of the most important issues in Korea to be globalized. And two panels were really talked specifically about Korea. And we have only 5 minutes. So even though we prepared some questions, we don't do that ourselves. I like to have the questions from the floor. Only 2 questions available. So please bear in mind the questions should be contributing to others. Thank you. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. 감사합니다. We have very excellent speakers, and there are many CEOs and future CEOs in this room, and hopefully, suggest we will have more time actually for interaction. But there is yesterday there was a powerful statement from Mr. Shingrong Liu about the role of HR, of course, in relation to crisis. I think it was only he who actually asked questions like, in the global financial crisis, what was the role of HR? What did we do right? What did we do wrong with respect to performance evaluation? So I thought that was his question that the other panelists might want to address. I'm not sure if Mr. Hewitt would be able to make a statement on that. And one other question I have is, this morning there was a very powerful statement about the failure of Japan's globalization, something to that effect. But of course, there was no time to ask the details about that. But listening again to Linda Myers today, speaking about how do we add value to Korea, to Korean culture, Confucian, male-oriented, seniority, hierarchical, collective. So what could we say about that? So thank you.
I think I need to be very, very brief to your questions. I mean, it takes maybe at least an evening to go through that topic. My main message today, and I stand up to that, is HR professional, not as an individual, but as a community, has to stand up to face either or. Either we admit we didn't play any significant role during the last decade, which leads to this disaster, or we need to admit there was a collective responsibility of human resources in that part, and then we need to make some reflections. I was missing this kind of self-critical reflections for us as a professional as a whole. Talking about performance management, 2 sentences to that, what we have been doing since the very beginning is we delinked totally performance management from monetary incentives. You will be surprised to see how can this happen? Every textbook says differently. Yes, I just gave an interview to HR Insight this morning, so if you would have a look at that interview the next week or so, I have provided some answer to that, why we did that, and why we believe, I'm still very much convinced, to delink performance management from monetary incentive directly is an interesting experiment that one should try and consider. Thanks.
I'll just add a quick comment, so agree completely. And I also had an interview with performance management, is a very important topic, and I also had an interview earlier this week on the topic. And we would say 2 lessons from the financial turmoil. One is that too many companies were too short-term in their orientation around performance management, setting very short-term goals, and also being too focused with short-term incentive compensation programs. So I would vary a bit from my colleague to say I still do think there is a role of linking performance management rewards, but it should be a longer-term orientation, and it should not just be on results. It also should include, like Procter & Gamble and other leading companies, it should include values and competencies and really respect for others, living up to the core values of the organization need to have equal importance to the results that are achieved.
There was a woman in the back who wanted to ask a question. I don't have any specific response to this gentleman, but if Chris, you're ready to, do you want to say?
Okay, so
Answer?
one more questions. Dr. Myers wants to have questions from women. Any? Okay, over there. Yes.
Go ahead, you've got.
Yes, I have the microphone here. I'm very impressed by your presentation, especially for Ms. Linda Meyer. I'm very interested to hear if you can share what is your best practices to promote women leadership in your firm. And secondly, what would be your comment or the advice to somebody from the government or Ministry of Labor, officers from Ministry of Labor, to promote more stronger women leadership in Korea?
What I can tell you is that I have begun to write something that I will present to management at SK. And since it's not finished, it's an idea for women at SK. It's not finished, so it's really not fair for me to tell you what it is, because I would be respectful to my management to ask them first to look at the proposal. So I can't really answer your question. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. The second part, I work with many of the foreign executives as part of Im Young-bak's commission on branding the nation. And there are some women on that group. And I think that the people there definitely know what my position is on women here in Korea. I have not been asked directly about it, but I think that when they see a woman who is in a position of visibility, they start, and I do the right thing, hopefully, then they start to see more what women are capable of, and I try and talk about how important women are, and I try and find out how many women there are at SK, and I'm sure a lot of the other companies are starting to think about that as well. But I think that we need to be careful in how we approach that, and we need to look at the business case for that. I think that if we can talk about the business case for bringing women into the attention, into the cognitive attention of leadership, and why it's so important for the country, and why it is also important at the individual level, at the family level, then we have a better way to talk about this topic. It's very much like HR. You can't say, I'm HR, I should be sitting at the table with the CEO. No. If you have not earned the right to be there, if you haven't done your homework, if you don't understand the business, what value will you bring to that table? So I think we have to do some homework. We have to know where the women in this country are, what they're doing, what the numbers are, look at the OECD rankings, and what do women contribute elsewhere. So we have to benchmark just as much in this particular area as we do in any other business area, and make a business case for it. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. Sorry, we ran out of time. If you want to develop women leaders, promote women, and pay properly, and give more challenging work. That's the answers. And thank you for your attention, and thank you for the speakers and panels for your contribution. Hope all the learnings from today in this room will help develop our leaders and talents in Korea. Thank you.